Good morning, everybody. It is February 12th, Saturday morning here, shooting this video right before I put it out, and it is Super Bowl Sunday weekend, and we have a fitting theme here, as this is going to be the first video in what I plan to have as a series, essentially called or along the lines of Lessons from California. Or we're going to California, whatever way you want to put it, because essentially where I want to go with this is that we are in the middle of our own housing crisis, which in comparative terms is sort of in its infancy, versus more mature housing crisis like that in California. So and the reason I say that this weekend is fitting is because we have representation there from the LA Rams in the Super Bowl tomorrow. Now, for everybody out there who's been watching on a regular basis any of these videos, it's a lot of doom and gloom. It's hard to watch any headlines about real estate and feel that great about them if you're in Canada, particularly here where we're in Ontario and Peterborough more specifically, because a lot of people are being marginalized and shoved out of this housing market. There's a real spread in the wealth gap, and it's really easy to get caught in the negativity of it all because it's pretty heavy. But I wanted to allocate potentially one video a month towards a segment which is a little bit more solutions based, a little bit more next steps oriented, because we've got a lot to learn from other places that are predecessors in these types of crisis, because we are certainly not the first ones to have a sort of chronic housing shortage and repercussions of that. California is a place of specific note. There's a lot of banter that goes on all the time. There's articles everywhere. There's books. The Affordable City here by Shane Phillips. He studied in California as an urban planner, wrote an entire book here on basically prescriptions towards affordability, and covers everything from supplying market rate housing on to building affordable, what types of incentives, how you deal with the displaced tenants, so on and so forth, really in depth. So you got entire books that are sort of really inspired by California. The Housing Boom and Bust, this is one I just go back to over and over and over again, by Thomas Sowell. This really chronicles the crash of the subprime housing market there in 2007, 2008. And a notable point in this book is how much different the market reacted in California than it did in places such as, say, Texas, where the land use planning restrictions were so much tighter in California. So it had a higher rise and subsequently a farther fall with property values because they deviated so much further from the mean, real true values. Now, a couple of points I want to hit on, because this is basically an intro, try and see if there's an interest out there, and I'm going to hit on what some of the topics might be, because there's a whack of great current discourse going on about this, because California has been battling this for a long time. They lead the United States as a state in terms of their amount of homelessness by a strong margin. If you go on to podcast on Spotify, Apple, and just search housing crisis, I believe there's as many as 4 podcasts just based out of California that are along the lines of discussing the issues of land use planning and housing affordability. Next, I want to just dive into some of the topics that are recurring themes here, because there's some really, really good stuff to dive into that our province and country can take notes from. There's no need to make all these go through these same motions on our own. But there's also some hard lessons to be learned about what just, quite frankly, what hasn't worked, and because there's a lot of things that haven't worked. It's very hard to find things that do work. So just going to run down a quick bullet list here, a little bit of final discourse on it, and then talk about what we're going to get into next week. So some of the key topics that California has been battling with in trying to deal with this thing is eliminating single-family zoning altogether. So this has been attempted to be passed through as a bill federally or pardon me, statewide several times now, to my understanding, once in 2019, potentially once even earlier, and once just recently, where they tried to just flat out abolish single family residential zoning and essentially allow up to 4 units everywhere across the entire state. Every neighborhood, every single home would be allowed to have essentially a fourplex on it. Now, this sounds like it got, you know, massive pushback from every city and municipality, and it's still sort of in the to and fro about what's going to happen there. But this argument's been going on, is whether they totally get rid of single family zoning. And they've gone through the same sort of accessory suites, secondary suites, accessory dwelling units motions that we have. They're ahead of us on that. But the same path that we took, where they've gone a level further in a lot of places, where you can have the secondary suite in your basement, you can have an accessory suite that you build in your backyard, and you convert the garage. So in some senses, with still single family residential zoning, you can have up to 3 dwellings on one property. Which is different than obviously being able to just build a turnkey fourplex. But nonetheless, these are some of the topics. Moving on down the list, adding market rate housing versus building affordable housing. This one's really gotten beaten back and forth a lot in these discussions, and really they've advanced these talks a lot. The talks that we're a lot of people are really just starting to narrow in on here, and the general public's just becoming aware of, is you sort of have the argument is, okay, look, here's the bookends of property affordability. You can't buy anything in the city of Peterborough for let's call it under $450,000, and then everything that is still within like family oriented average income range, like sadly enough, that goes up to about $1 million now, or maybe slightly over. That's your range. And there's the argument that if you add enough market rate housing in the middle, you sort of alleviate, you move it all down the rung, so that the bottom end stock becomes more affordable, and then it opens back up to those who have been marginalized. But there's been a lot of pushback, or there's good arguments on both sides, but pushback that you need both. You need market rate housing right in the middle to take the pressure off of everything in the middle there. And then you also need to continually keep adding affordable housing that's government funded, and lots of it, because the prices arguably now that are actually affordable for a lot of the incomes that are in our city are never coming back without really very intentionally purpose-built product being put out there that has to be subsidized with the current land values, so and construction costs and so on. So discussion about free market economics versus government intervention, and the synthesis of both. How do you get the government money actually out there? How do you actually free up the land? How do you continue to maintain environmental restrictions? How do you avoid sprawl and still hit your unit targets when you're facing the immigration targets that we are? So maintain your lands, your forests, your wetlands, your farmlands, and still build enough housing units, period, and build stuff that people actually want to move into, instead of having this issue where you still don't service that sort of single family detached, basically the household unit well enough, and you still suffer even if you build a lot of condo units. That's a discussion. Battling Nimbyism. It seems like each time these arguments come down the pipes, the state legislator, I hope I'm using the terminology correctly, because the American politics, even though I read enough about it, I still don't have a total grasp of the entire spider web of how everything interlinks there. So forgive me if I'm using some, if I misplace some of the terms about how their politics is organized. But battling Nimbyism, every time that the state has come over, or there's been sort of overarching bills sort of getting pushed about how to essentially deregulate a lot of the land use planning and just let people build and just let the free market sort of start to provide some inventory. There's massive kickback from neighborhood associations, housing groups, and then the municipalities who have to answer to these people to try and get voted in municipally. There's huge pushback. People are afraid that this type of swath zoning changes or large-scale affordable housing projects are going to degrade their property value. So you have the basically sort of the those who are already in homes always sort of blocking the new developments. That's an age-old problem, it seems, in this debate. So Nimbyism is core central to this, and how to create incentives that navigate that and appease everybody to actually get project going is it's a long road, and they're still going through it. And we're going to be in this ringer for quite some time as well ourselves in Ontario and BC. So we got to watch we have a lot to learn from the history of their debates there, and the successes and failures of each of the individual municipalities. Nearly last, homelessness, record amounts of homelessness, arguably tons more coming in California when a lot of these rent deferrals that came out, around March when COVID started, are coming to an end soon. So there's a lot of people basically that are probably going to be a further deepening of the homelessness issue in California, and so they're really at a breaking point right now, where the time for action is right now, and so it's gonna be interesting to see how they proceed. So it's really something where on a month-by-month basis, I think there's a lot of value to follow how they're dealing with their homelessness, and not only trying to provide shelter, but B, how do you restore community livelihood and integration for folks who have been kind of pushed out and then really went down a path that was one they never intended to go down. How do you get them back in to a sort of working, fully functioning, thriving, healthy position in the community? And then there is just some general discourse that can be covered here about land use planning restrictions altogether, because arguably the root of all of these issues is just flat out the need. Don't get me wrong, we have a need to plan the use of our lands. We can't, it's not a free-for-all. It needs to be intentional, the way that commercial and industrial lands interrelate with the residential, the buffer zones, airports. It's an extremely complicated topic. The growth projections, where the water is, maintaining significant wetland populations for wildlife. There really is a lot to it. So we can't just say you can build whatever you want, wherever you want. But there seems to be a pretty decent stack of evidence showing that anywhere that you have more loose zoning and planning restrictions, and the free market of construction and capitalism development is able to just provide housing as people seek need for it, or as profits permit, and the industry continues to build as the margins, if the housing shortage ever appears, margins go up, they build more, they bring the margins down because they have brought the supply up in accord with the demand. It's very simple. Is the land use planning restrictions and greenlighting of projects and just land appropriation availability for construction is just it's a one-to-one connection of they can build when the need is there. It prevents the prices from skyrocketing because there's not such a long lag time in between. Okay, we know demand is here. We get, we're shovel ready 5 years later. It's like, okay, demand is there. There's land everywhere. We can go into the office, get a permit. We can use all this land to build. I have a, 4 to 9 month turnaround on construction. It's almost immediate. A lot of builders are speccing houses all the time. Building on speculation, building model homes. So they're always ahead of it. We saw this happen in Alberta, Saskatchewan. Man, all the prairies is a little bit less constricted. Their population hasn't grown as rapidly, and they haven't seen the same housing woes that we have here. And so that's to talk about land use planning, period, and how much the government's job and involvement should be on an ongoing forward basis. And then that's just the sort of tip of the iceberg, because this story keeps evolving. So keep an eye out. This is video number 1, everybody, of hopefully the Lessons from California, or We're Going to California series. Hopefully we can derive some real meaningful stuff out of this. This is not probably something that's going to interest everybody who wants to, just oodle and fascinate over property values and how much they're going to go up and how much money they're going to make and all this and all that. I mean, I totally understand trying to understand forward, future, think, project, macroeconomics. Love that stuff. But I also want to start shifting a portion of my time, effort, energy, and the content that I put out towards forward thinking solutions. How do we get out of this? What's the road forward? So hope everybody can get on board with that message. Let me know down in the comments if you like where that's heading. And next week, I think we're going to try and cover a little bit of discussion about vacant homes. I've heard people mentioning it to me, Mitch, like, what about vacant homes? I think there's a lot of them out there. Is it a factor in our, supply crisis? Is there availability out there that just isn't being capitalized on because it's owned by foreign nationals that are not interested in the hassles of renting? They'd rather just ride out these gains. It's relatively cheap compared to where they're living and their currency, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's something that I don't know a ton about. I'm going to take a bit of time to research it next week. If you got any inputs, let me know. Interesting topic nonetheless. So let's leave it at that. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And as always, thanks so much for catching up in the comments last week. We had a great response. Let's see it again. Everybody bring your discussion and let's sort some of this stuff out. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.